Okay, so let us first go through the topics that we did in the previous class. So we talked about modifiers, and modifiers were basically applied on two things. We could use modifiers with classes, or we could use them with class members. So with classes, there's only access modifiers which were possible. So classes usually don't have non-access modifiers, and there were just two access modifiers that we could use with the classes. So the first one was default, when you don't mention something explicitly, and the other one was public. And for class members, we had both access modifiers as well as non-access modifiers. Again, the access modifiers of class members were of three types. So one was public, the other was default, and private. For non-access modifiers, we had um, two types for class members. One was final, and the other was static. So this is a brief classification of modifiers. So modifiers are generally of two types: access modifiers and non-access modifiers. In case of classes, we do not have any non-access modifiers. We just have access modifiers, default and public. For class members, we have both. So the access modifiers are public, default, and private, and the non-access modifiers are final and static. Next, we talked about encapsulation. So encapsulation, so definition of encapsulation is um, hiding sensitive data from users. So the main objective of encapsulation is hiding sensitive data, from the users. Now, what does sensitive data mean? If we take a look at a class, let's say this is a class, and we have certain variables, and then the rest of the class. We are not bothered about that. So sensitive data refers to all the variables or class attributes. The variables or class attributes. So these are referred to as sensitive data. So to make sure that users cannot directly access the variables of a class, we use encapsulation. Now, how do we implement encapsulation so that users cannot access these variables? So we use a non-access modifier, or rather we use an access modifier. So we use an access modifier called private. Just before we define the variables, we just write the keyword private. And by defining the variable in this way, it becomes, private to this class. So private means it belongs to this class. So these two variables, on declaring them private, will only be available within these two brackets, just inside the class. So it will be available everywhere inside the class, but outside this bracket, it will not be available. So in this way, we can, prevent the users from directly accessing these variables or modifying them. For this thing to work, we must have the main function in a different class. So let's say we have the main function in this class, and just how the main function is written. So we will have the objects here. So the objects will be defined here using this class. Objects will be of type my class. So in that way, we can, um, implement encapsulation. Let's write down a program and see how it works. So let's call this my class, which will have the class attributes and the class variables. So the program that we are going to write is about the program statement is this one. So student has a name, a roll number, a class in which he is studying, a home address, and a date of birth. So we have to design a class containing constructors and user-defined functions get and set to get to input data. I mean the get function. The get function is used to input data, and the set function is used for displaying data. Rather, this is just written opposite. This should be set. Set is used to set data or input data, and get is used to display data. So these names are with respect to the user's perspective. The user is going to set data, as in set the input data, and the user is going to get the data, as in he wants to see the data. So get will basically display the data, set will set the value of the variables. So let's write down the class. So we could do this without you could just do this as a normal program, but just for the sake of explaining encapsulation, I'll be using the private keyword to define the variables. So I'll need a string variable for the name. I'll need an integer variable for the roll number. For the class, I'll again need a string variable. For the home address, again, a string variable. So let's call the address addr. And lastly, I'll have one more string variable to store the date of birth. So DOB stands for date of birth. So let's put comment lines as well. So these are all my variables that I'll be needing in the program. And next we are going to define the constructor for this class. So the constructor name would be the same as my class name, and it will be public. It will take certain arguments, or rather, let's say it does not take arguments. It just initializes the variables to default values. So name is equal to null, role is equal to 0, class is equal to null, address is equal to null, and the date of birth is also initially it's null. So that's everything inside the constructor. So this is my constructor to initialize attributes or variables, whatever you may call them. The next thing that I'm going to write is the functions, the get function and the set function. So these are two functions that I'll be writing next. So the set function, so I'll be writing the set function first. The set function is used to set values for the variables of the class. So it will have certain parameters. So string, the first parameter is for the name, the second parameter is for the roll number, the third parameter is for the class in which the student is studying, the fourth parameter is for the address, and the fifth parameter is for the date of birth. Inside, what I'll do is, since I've taken all the values as parameters, I'll just be assigning them to the class variables or attributes. So name is equal to nm, which is the first parameter. Role is equal to r, which is the second parameter. And similarly the others. So address will be a, and birth will be D. So that's everything that my set method will contain. Now I'll have another method called, see, I could do this in two ways. I could write the set method in two ways. One, I'm taking all the data in the main class, in the main method, and then I'm passing it as, arguments. Or we could do one more thing. This should be easier to understand. So let's not take arguments just now. I'll be talking about arguments later. Let's do this in this way. Hmm. Let me import the scanner class here. I'll be taking inputs here itself. So I'll not be doing it in main. I'll be taking inputs inside the set class itself. So I have to define the scanner class. So I'll have to define an object. So scanner sc is equal to new scanner system dot name. Usually this particular line, we usually write it inside the main function, because normally we take inputs, we ask user for inputs using the system.out.println statement, and then we take inputs inside the main function. So that's why we define this line inside the main function. But since we are taking inputs inside the set method, so we are having this line to take input from user. Next, we'll just display messages to the user. So first, enter your name, and then name is equal to sc dot next, just like we used to take input. Similarly, we'll have another SOPLN statement for each of the variables. So here I will just say enter roll number, and the roll number will be sc dot next int. Again, enter your class, sc dot next, enter your address, again sc dot next, and at the end we just ask the user to enter his or her date of birth. So enter your date of birth, dd yyyy format. So I'm just specifying the format that I want the user to enter the data, to enter his or her date of birth. This will be sc dot Next. So that should work. That should, that's all about the set method. So I'm done with the set method. Now I'll move on to the get method. So get does nothing but display everything. So this should be a simple method. It will just have SOPLN statements and display all the values. So plus the name, roll number, plus roll. Class plus the class variable. So just to be sure, these variables are the class attributes that I have defined. So I've taken input for the class attributes using the set method, and I'm using the get method to display all the data. So how this thing works will be clear once we write the main function. So after class we have the address, and lastly the date of birth. That's all inside the get method. So that's everything that we need to write. Now I have defined a class, I have defined some attributes, I have written a constructor to initialize them to default values, I have a set method to set values, and I have a get method to display the values. So my class ends here. So I compile the class and there are no syntax errors. Good. Now I'll use another class to write the main function. So I'll just go inside this class and I'll simply write the main function inside this class. So just like we normally write the main function, instead of writing the scanner class here, we have written it inside that set function. So inside the main, we would not have any scanner class as of now because we are not taking any inputs. So I'll just have objects of my first class. So objects will be of this class type. So class, let's call it student1, equal to new my class. So this is the constructor that I'm calling. So what this does, this particular line, it defines an object called student1, and it calls the constructor to initialize all the attributes that I had defined in this class. Now, okay, so take your time and write, copy it down. Once you are done, just let me know and I'll move on. Okay, so have you finished writing the whole program? Just let me know once more whether you have finished writing the whole program. So I'm assuming that you have finished writing the whole program. So I'm moving on to the next class. So I'm closing this and I'm moving on to this. Okay. Taking screenshots is fine, but make sure that you write later on write the copy down the program in your. Okay. Make sure you copy the rest of the part later on. Writing will help you understand the thing better and help you remember the whole thing. If you just take screenshots and just keep them like that, then it will not help you. Okay. So moving on with the class P1. So I've defined an object called student1 of type my class. So this creates an object with all those attributes that I had defined in the previous class. So now I have my object. What I'll do is I'll use this object to call the methods. So first I'll set certain values, or let's say first, just for the sake of making sure that the function is working, or rather the constructor did its job, we'll just call the get method first once. This will display all the default values that were set by the constructor. So all the default values that were set by the constructor will be shown once this line gets executed. Next, oh sorry, this should be student1. Next, I'll call the set method. So this will, ask the user for inputs and it will set all those values to the respective variables. And finally, again, I'll call the get method. So let me put comment lines here. So I'm checking here, checking to see if the constructor worked. Calling method to set, or rather to take user values, user input. Let's say user input. Calling a method to take user input and display let's say calling a method to display all the data, and that's all that I need to write. Okay, so let's compile this. Class compile, no syntax errors. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll run the program. So okay, so there seems to be an error. Let's see where it went wrong. So I have my class. So calling the set method will do this. Calling the get method will display everything. So here I'm not getting. Let's see what happens. Hmm. So this is working. So why is this not working? Let's take a look. So calling student from dot get, and then it's not displaying anything. It's showing me the null values. So let's delete this line and have this instead. Oh, sorry. So this should give me a more formatted output. Let's try it once more. So input mismatch. Okay. I think I made a mistake while typing. Okay, since I'm using the next function, so it will not take spaces. Right, see, take a look. Since I'm putting a space here, it will give me an error because the next function terminates the string when it encounters a space just here. So when it is encountering this space, so it's terminating the input, and this sing part is going to the roll number variable. It's trying to assign this portion to the roll number variable, which is of int type. So that's why I'm getting an error here. Input mismatch exception. Okay. So instead of next, let's use next line and see what happens. Also, let's change this one also to next line. Now let's compile and let's take a look at what happens. So I'm just again running, compile this, again running this. Now let's see. Okay, so now it's working fine. Again, I might have made a mistake while typing. So my keyboard is giving me some problems. Just hold on. Let me run it one more time. So I input your name. I have your roll number, your class. I think there's again a problem with the program code. Let's take a look. Enter your address. Hmm. So for some reason the next line function is not working there. So this should work fine. Again, if I use a space here, it will give me an error. So I'm avoiding that right now because I cannot use the next line function for some reason there. And the date of birth. Okay, so the program runs fine up to there. So there's one more thing that I need to, tell you. What if I, let's try and do this with the buffered reader class. So instead of using the scanner class, let's try and use the buffered reader class. So java.io dot start. Most of the thing will remain same except I'll have here. So for using the buffered reader, I for using the buffered reader class, I'll have to make certain changes. The first one is importing the buffered reader class. For that, I'll be importing it from the IO package. So the statement changes from java.util.scanner to java.io.start. Next, the function where I'm taking inputs, just after the function brackets, I need to write this portion, throws IO exception. You do not have exception handling in this class, so I'll not be going into details, but just make sure you write whenever you are using the buffered reader class, make sure the method where you are defining the buffered reader class or the buffered reader the method where you are using the buffered reader, that method should have this piece of code, throws IO exception after the function brackets. Just make sure you do not miss that. So now instead of scanner, I'll have buffered reader. It's a bit lengthy, but it does not, uh, provide any problems with, working with strings. In scanner class, sometimes you'll get problems while working with strings. So it will be much more handy to remember the buffer, how to write, how when you're working with string. Later on we'll be learning about string functions and we'll be working on string programs. So for string programs we will basically, try to use the buffered reader so that our string functions are much more easier. Just we need to write sr br.readline, br.readline. That solves our problem. So for string we have br.readline. For integer we have, then for this we'll have br.readline. So it's a bit lengthy, but nevertheless, again, working with strings is much more easier when using buffered reader instead of scanner. So I'll just copy this and paste it there. Now let's compile and see. Okay, no errors. Also, let's compile this. Errors found. Okay. So again, throws IO exception. So this should basically work. Hmm, okay. So since we are not dealing with exception handling, this piece of code is a shortcut to bypass exception handling. So whenever there is an exception, what it will do is it will just ignore that exception. So that's what this line means, or these two words mean. So throws IO exception basically ignores any exceptions, any input output exceptions that occur during executing my program. So let's try and run it once more. So I type anything, doesn't matter, will work well and fine. So that's the main advantage of using buffer reader. You do not need to worry about the spaces and the number of words and everything else. It just works automatically. So this is one more way of, writing the program. The first time we used scanner class to, work with inputs, and this time we have used the buffer reader class. Try to keep both of them in mind, and when we are working with strings, try and use the buffer reader class. That it will be lengthy, but it will be much more easier to work with strings. So okay, so how is encapsulation working here? Just take a look. So I've defined all the class variables or the class attributes as private. What happens is if I try to access, let's try it out here. If I try to access an individual class attribute using the object, it will give me an error. Let's say student1 dot name is equal to. So I'm trying to, instead of using the function, I'm directly trying to access the data of the class called my class. So name is an attribute of the class my class. I'm trying to access it directly. See, they have already pointed out. See, the name has private access in my class. So this will basically not compile in BlueJ. So it's directly showing you the error that's going to happen. Since name is defined as private, I cannot directly access it. I must use the functions that I have defined to work upon the private members of the class. So that's how encapsulation works. It does not let me, directly access the. So these variables can no longer be accessed directly from from a different class. Inside this class, it's fine. Inside this class, you can work with them. But when you use this class in a different class, as in I'm using the my class, I'm defining an object using my class in my class P1. So there you cannot directly access the members of this class that have been declared as private. So that's how encapsulation works. I'm protecting my sensitive data. So these all variables are my sensitive data of my class. So these are the sensitive data of my class, and I do not want other classes to access these sensitive data. So it works well and fine when I define it as private. So that's how encapsulation works. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic of today. Um, we'll just be doing half of this. We'll not be doing overloading today. We'll be talking about parameters and arguments, and that will be the last topic for today. So, so what are parameters? Sorry. So let's see. Um, yeah. So what are parameters and what are arguments? Why two different names? Well, just to differentiate, so that we can differentiate. Parameters are basically, let's take a look at the program code here. So parameter is basically this variable that we usually take when we are defining a method. So my method is the name of a method. When we are defining the method, the variables that we write inside the function signature. So this whole thing, as I've told you previously, the first line of any function or method is called the method signature or function signature. So the variables that are defined in the function signature itself, these variables, so this particular variable here is called a parameter, whereas the actual values that I am passing when I'm calling the method, see, I'm calling the method here. I'm not using any object because it has been defined as static. So I'm calling the method here. I'm passing a value to the method. So these values are called arguments. The easiest way to remember is so arguments are basically the actual values that are passed to a function during the function call. Example, so this is a method, my method, and I'm passing a value. Let's say Liam. So this portion here is an argument. Arguments are the actual values or the actual data, not a variable then. See, Liam is not a variable, which is the actual data that is being passed to the function. So the actual data that I'm passing to a function is called an argument. So in certain cases, you would also be passing a variable here, but normally we don't do that. We pass a value, a constant value here. This value is called an argument. Just remember, value passed to function during the function call. So just remember when you are calling the function, the value that you are going to pass, whether it is a constant or a variable, doesn't matter. Usually it is a constant value. That this particular thing is called an argument. Then what is a parameter? Since I'm passing a value when I'm calling the function, so the function signature will have to receive this value into something. Just take a look here. Since I'm passing this value here, this value needs to be received into something. When I'm defining the method, I need to receive this passed value into something to hold that value. So I define a variable here. When I'm defining the function or the function header, the function signature, I also define a value to store the past, value which I am, passing when I'm calling the function. So I'm passing a value. To store that value, I'm defining a variable. That variable is nothing but a parameter. The variable defined in a function signature. So I hope the function signature, what is a function signature, that is clear. The first line of a function definition is known as the function signature. The variable defined in a function signature that receives the argument value passed during method call. Okay, so that's the definition. What is a parameter? The variable defined in a function signature that receives the argument value passed during the method call. So for example, static void my method. So this is the function signature or method signature. So static void my method string fname. So I'm defining a variable, and then there's all the lines inside the function. I'm not bothered about that. This particular thing is called a parameter, and this whole first line of the method definition, this here is called the method signature. So this is called a signature, the function signature or method signature. Variables here defined here are called parameters. So I hope the difference between parameters and arguments is clear. See, so fname is a parameter. So here fname is a parameter, whereas Liam, Jenny, and Anja, the values that I am passing are arguments. Easiest way to remember is, the actual values that are being passed to the function call during the function call is called the argument. The variables that are defined to receive this argument is called a parameter. Okay, so that's all for today. We'll be talking about the rest of we'll be talking about multiple parameters and return values in the next class, and we'll be doing overloading as well. So that's all for today. Make sure to watch the video at later from the start and take down proper notes, not just taking screenshots and leaving them as it is. So writing it down and taking notes will help you remember what has been taught.